What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Before we get into the introduction, I just want to sincerely apologize to all of my subscribers for the lack of content over the past couple of weeks. I have actually, excuse me, been on vacation and just returning to normality now with some very interesting things happening over that time span, and there may be a video coming shortly of that with all of those experiences. But once again, I wanted to apologize to everybody, like I said, for the lack of content over the past couple of weeks. I was on vacation for 6 days and hadn't actually gotten a chance to bring you any content after I returned, so I sincerely apologize for that once again. But now that I am back, we are going to be bringing content consistently, and I have a great video for you today. This is another interview, continuing on with the interview series, and we're going to be interviewing Nina Bakoyiannis from New York today, and she's going to be telling us a little bit about her story, about her disability, and some of the things that she's done throughout her life. And I'm not going to give you any more spoilers than that. I'm just going to let her start talking and kind of telling the story about her disability and the things that have happened throughout her life and the things that she has done and the things that she's planning on doing and her goals for the future and things like that. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Nina now. I hope that everybody will enjoy this video today. Also, before we get into this interview, if you have not subscribed to the channel and you're listening to this interview for the first time and watching it, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you are made aware when new content becomes available. And also, give this video a thumbs up and a like, because that's how YouTube will get the word out to other people that there is new content on this channel. So we are back here now. Nina has joined us, and I'm going to let her start off by telling us a little bit about herself as well as her disability, and I'll be asking questions throughout the rest of this interview.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. Hi, y'all. Hello, Chris's viewers. So my name is Nina Bakoyiannis. I'm Chris's friend from Adapt. A little about myself. So I'm born and raised in New York City, from Queens. And I was born with my disability, which is a physical one. I'm seated in a wheelchair. I'll do a visual description for folks who could benefit from that. So I'm seated in a black wheelchair. I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing a blue tank top looking shirt, and I'm a white woman, and I have on lipstick, and behind me is a curtain and a wall. So my disability is a joint condition. It's called arthrogryposis. And it basically means that my joints are just a lot tighter than most people. So I experience a lot of like joint contractures, meaning that like certain joints in my body are much tighter and don't let my, my arms extend all the way or my legs extend all the way straight. So it limits a lot of range of motion. So like little things I can't do, like reach my head or straighten my arm all the way. And arthrogryposis is very variable across people. There's many different types as well. Some people walk fine and just are minimally affected, and some people are rather, kind of like me, very, very affected and use wheelchairs. And another part of my disability too that I think is common for folks who use wheelchairs is scoliosis as well, so curvature of the spine. So my case of scoliosis was progressing a lot when I was younger. So my doctors decided to put rods in my spine to keep it from getting worse. So I had that surgery when I was a kid, and it's been pretty stable since, but I think the joint contractures and the scoliosis kind of go hand in hand from sitting all day. So I use a wheelchair to get around every day, and I do like walking exercises for physical therapy and that kind of stuff. So, but it's always been about, maintaining health rather than like with the underlying hope that I would like walk normally, right? It's more about like kind of just maintaining the muscles and the joint movement that I do have, which I think is a healthy objective to hold as disabled adults. And it's, impacted my life in a lot of ways, a lot of wonderful ways, a lot of, complicated ways. And it's brought me to a lot of really cool places like Adapt, how I met Chris. And
Yes, we've done a lot of work together through Adapt, which is definitely great.
yeah, yeah. And I guess I'll tell you a little about my career too. So I'm in grad school, studying to be a psychologist. So I'm in year 5 of a PhD program. And I think part of me always kind of knew I wanted to be a psychologist. We don't see disabled people often in media, in the medical field as professionals, right? And it's hard when you don't really see people like you mirrored in the places that you go or the people that you receive help from. And I always give this example when people ask me um, what got me into psychology. I was in undergrad and I was double majoring in literature and psychology. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I love literature. I still do. I love to write. But I was like kind of in this place where I was acknowledging that I didn't think I really wanted it as a career. I loved it as this like hobby. I didn't want to ruin the hobby by making it about, my whole career and financial stability. So, and at the same time, I was like falling in love with psychology, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with it yet because there's a lot of different avenues with psychology, with research and teaching and being a therapist. And I'm sitting in a philosophy class. I was like 19. I was young. I was like a sophomore, and I was in the front row, and I'm obviously the only disabled person there. And the professor is like rambling on about like, we have to. He said something like, life is very, subjective. What's a lot to one person is going to be less difficult to another person. He gives this example of this student he had who used a wheelchair, who was like so inspiring for going to law school and like doing normal everyday things, right? And that in itself is condescending to hear, right? And most disabled people don't like to be called inspirations for doing like the bare minimum, right? Just kind of like going on about their lives.
Me neither.
Because it,
I'm the same way.
yeah, yeah, because it implies that like, we shouldn't be doing those things, that we're doing something extraordinary, right?
Exactly.
And so he's going on and on about that, and I'm used to it and blah blah blah. And then he goes, maybe I should give some sort of trigger warning for this, about suicide, but he says, I don't know how he did it, because if I was in his position, I'd kill myself. And I'm sitting there.
That's kind of crazy that he said that.
Yeah, I'm sitting there as a an impressionable 19-year-old that's like obviously disabled. And, half the room is like nodding, half the room is looking at me. And I'm sitting there just like baffled. And I remember leaving the classroom and thinking to myself, what if I had been suicidal, right? What if someone in that room with me was disabled and had thought about that, and then they go to this authority figure, this professor who's supposed to give us like education and grounding in the world, and to reinforce that really terrible thought. And you know I think that really got me into realizing how much I wanted to be a therapist. Just thinking about what it means for us disabled folks to live in a society where that's common discourse, where people really genuinely believe that our lives are worse than death. And when we talk about suicide in able-bodied spaces, it's always a bad thing. It's always get them in a treatment program, get them a therapist. When we talk about suicide in disabled spaces, suddenly there's this discourse about choice and autonomy, and that is coming from a place of the assumption that they think our lives should end, right? So I left that classroom that day, and I was so furious. I went to talk to him about it, and he was so confused about why I was offended, because he really thought it was a compliment.
So he thought what you were saying, what he was saying, was a compliment to anybody with a disability, which
Yeah.
that's kind of I I don't know what I would have done in that situation either, to be honest, because for those viewers that have seen me do many different types of videos, I am blind, and you know, as Nina said, we can live in regular society and live normal lives, but we have things that might get in the way. And
Mm.
I guess my next question and to you, and I'll let you also finish what you were saying, is what types of difficulties has your disability presented both in school and other places? Um, and what other types of thing? What were your initial thoughts and conversations to him? I guess after he said that.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. And with him, so I had been, I went to his office hours and I said, that was a very inappropriate comment. I don't remember what I said, but I was something about my reaction to it and how it was inappropriate of him to say something like that. And he goes, "Well, I meant it as a compliment. Like, you guys must have such hard lives, and I'm like commending you for it." And in that moment, like, it just struck me that he would never understand because he was so caught in that, like, idea of disability being so terrible, right? This very not nuanced view of what our lives are like. And I kind of just left. I didn't even want to say anything to him. I was like, I don't want to use my energy to argue with this man. And I left. And then he gave me like a B in his class or something after all that. Um, and I think about the larger question about how it's impacted schooling. I mean, I think I've always been I've always loved school. Clearly, if I'm like, out here wasting 6 years of my life on a PhD, not wasting, I'm devoting 6 years of my life to a PhD. But I think I've always been kind of praised in some sense for that. And I've been reflecting on why. And I think so much of our value as disabled people is in our ability to um, what able-bodied people think is like overcome our disability, right? And like fit in to their worlds that they created and decide whether we enter or whether we don't. And I think um, it's complicated because on one hand, I often felt like my professors like loved me so much because of my disability, which is like a complicated relationship. I have a complicated relationship to that because I think, on one hand, I just want to be like a normal student, just doing, what I'm doing. Um, but then on the flip side of that, sometimes, you get treated very badly because of your disability. Um, Clearly, like that professor. And when I started grad school, um, my first placement was at a nursing home, and I was a therapist at the nursing home, and it was my first time doing therapy. And I remember one day I was leaving, and the security guard didn't believe me that I was staff, and she wouldn't let me off the premises and made me call my supervisor, and then like didn't believe that, and then had to call the other security guard who knew me because she was new, I guess. And she was very apologetic, and she was kind of just like, well, you see, we have to be careful, we have to blah blah blah. And I left that day, and I was just thinking to myself, like, just how hard it is to like assert your professional role in a world that is like so assuming that you don't belong in it. And it's hard enough to do that, just to go through a program like this and do well and build a career. And then on top of that, you have all of these other you know emotional burdens to carry, I think, and manage other people's reactions to your disability while you're like managing your own, and it gets complicated. And I think, there's the difference between like the social model and the medical model of disability. The social model is like, well, I'll start with the medical model. The medical model is that your body is the impairment that should be fixed, right? Whereas the social model of disability is saying bodies are just bodies with a wide range of functionality and limits and abilities. And it's more so about the environment that's what's disabling us, right? If everywhere had a ramp, would my disability matter, right? And I think I'm much more lean towards the social model. Um, but I think there is some merit in acknowledging that, like, even if society was fully accessible, I still have a body that experiences pain and still can't reach the top of my head, right? And still can't do X, Y, and Z. But I think it's hard to admit that in a world where our bodies are so stigmatized. Um, so I don't know. That was a long response to your question, Chris.
No, I definitely appreciate the response. And, one of the things that I can say from me going to college, small college, only got a bachelor's degree, but it seemed like, I don't know if you had this experience either, but a lot of the professors I had, or some of the ones I can remember one specific experience, my criminal justice professor, who unfortunately is no longer with us anymore,
Mm.
he said right in front of the entire class that I was like his favorite student in that class. Did you ever have any type of experience like that where, like a teacher would favor you sometimes more over the other people in that
Yeah,
class because of your disability? I mean, I took it as a compliment, but I wasn't sure if, what he meant by that statement.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's funny. I know. And it's a very strange experience being disabled, because on one hand, you're like put on this pedestal, right? And then, 5 minutes later, you're like being, you know, uh, I don't know, demonized by the public just for existing, right? So there's not a lot of space to just be like a nuanced person that exists somewhere in the middle, right? Like, the world has a very split, I think, view of us. And I think it speaks to like the public's or able-bodied people's difficulty in really sitting with the experience of disability and acknowledging the nuance of it. And I think that comes from a place of their own fear of becoming disabled. So they don't know what the heck to do with us, because we remind them of the thing that they could likely and will likely, become one day if they get into old age. So I I relate to that story, Chris. It's hard being in that position and kind of trusting. I think I've experienced similar stuff like that, and I think my reaction to it is I have a hard time accepting praise, or like accepting like you're doing this thing well, because I don't trust that I actually am. I trust that it's, or I worry that it's this like lower standard that is set for disabled people. Because, we kind of get praised just for like waking up in the morning and waiting online in Starbucks, right? People like congratulate me for doing that for no real reason, right? So
or being
I have
called
a hard,
inspirational because we're doing things like everyday tasks. I've been
yeah,
I've been called that so many times, and I guess one thing I can interject here is, and you might find this interesting, and I haven't really told many people this. Some people know, some people don't. But I was in a Walmart one time, and we were going out, we were leaving, and this lady comes up to me, and she's like, obviously knew that I can't see, so she comes up to me and she says, "I want to heal you." I said, "Okay." So she did. Now I don't exactly remember what she did, but she's like, "Well, I'm going to heal you, and you'll get your sight back." And I'd love to. This was like 10 years ago, maybe 10 or 11 years ago. I'd love to find this lady and be like, "Hey, I got bad news for you. It didn't work. I'm still totally blind." But you are right, though. I think, even learning a lot of the stuff I have through, working with you guys through Adapt is that I think the public, the non the able-bodied individuals are kind of nervous about possibly becoming disabled, and I don't think
Yeah.
it. I think it's something that they think may not happen to them, but it might, it could. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
we never know what can happen to us from day to day. I mean, I don't have, a physical disability other than being blind, but that doesn't mean that, tomorrow or something like that, I wouldn't get something else,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that could happen. But like you said, I think the public is scared. I think the
Yeah.
able-bodied public is scared of
Yeah.
actually becoming disabled, and that kind of leads me to my next question: is um, through your advocacy work, through Adapt, and going to various, actions, and protesting for certain things like nursing homes and advocacy like that, has it helped you uh, to become, I wouldn't say more accepting is the right word, but has it helped you, you know, uh, learn about yourself, and like what types of things has the advocacy work that you've been doing helped you do with your disability? Has it helped you learn anything about yourself in general?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. I think so. I got involved with Adapt years ago. I would like go to protests and pre-COVID. I was on the mailing list, and this is when we were Long Island Adapt. I like lived in New York City, but I like wanted to be in the know. There wasn't a New York City chapter at the time. And then when the pandemic hit, I got much more involved with Adapt for a lot of different reasons. One, I just had so much more free time because I was quarantining pretty intensely when COVID was, just starting and at its peak and before the vaccines. But also I had this moment of watching the world carry on and pretend like COVID was nothing while our people were the ones that were dying and suffering. Um and I still am, I shouldn't use past tense. I'm so angry. I'm absolutely furious with how this country has handled COVID and continues to handle COVID. And I think that drove a lot of my passion and energy into Adapt. And I think, as disabled people, you carry with you this feeling in your stomach that people don't really want you here. People really don't think you fit in here. People really don't want you to belong. And, there's subtle ways that you pick that up, right? Like, they're cutting back Medicaid every 5 minutes. And I mean, that's not subtle, right? But, every year there's some threat to your service, but then the politicians say, no, we support disabled people, right? But that's not what they're doing. So you're left with this feeling. And then when COVID hit, the whole world's just kind of stopped and said, well, it's just the disabled, it's just the elderly that will die, right? So it was no longer just this like ambiguous worry or feeling. Like it was plastered on every news station across the country, across the world, really. And it became so undeniable. And in some sense, it just made what I was worried about or what I was feeling or this unsettled feeling in my stomach real, and it just threw me into being more involved in activism. And oh god, Adapt has helped me grow in so many ways. I think, I grew up feeling like I had to fit in to the world to get love and acceptance, that I had to like do my best to be smart and good in school and like fit in with my able-bodied peers. And that takes a toll on anyone, right? And I think the beauty of Adapt is that you're fighting on a systemic level for things like all kinds of disability rights, about home care access, about health care, about voting rights, about housing, about whatever it is. And to do that, you acknowledge in yourself that I'm here. I'm going to stand on this sit, you know, on this sidewalk. I'm going to shout for what I need. I'm going to take up space and I'm not going to apologize for that. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things that you can learn as a disabled person is to not thank the people for giving us the bare minimum, right? It is to say, this isn't enough to meet our needs and we're going to fight for it and we're going to stop traffic and we're going to get the news stations and we're going to call the politicians and the public. And I think it helped me feel so much more settled in my identity as a disabled person and much more confident in that. um and I are, especially as like a disabled woman too, right? Like there's a lot of pressure to just like be like cute and pretty and quiet and silent.
There is.
And
Yep.
yep. Yeah, and like I grew up, I think, internalizing that in some way, and with Adapt, I'm unlearning that, and it's wonderful.
Would you agree? I mean, you have a different experience than me with the visual
Mm.
uh, abilities. So, do you see sometimes, in people's body language when they see someone with a disability or whatever, this person's, has a disability. Should I really talk to them? Do I want to talk to them? Like, has it been difficult sometimes, even, doing actions and stuff like that to get people to speak to you sometimes if you
Mm.
because you have a disability? I mean, it's more visible than mine is, but have you had those issues doing advocacy work like that?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I grew up kind of like trying to be very attuned to people's body language and like trying to read situations to like make sure, I'm not bothering this person. I'm not asking for too much, right? Which is like, I mean, you know, in healthy amounts, that's okay. But when it becomes too much and that's what you're constantly, fretting about, it's not a very peaceful way to interact. But and I mean, with Adapt though, yeah, right, because you're passing people are passing you on the street, and you're like handing out flyers, like, "Hey, fight for disability rights," and like, we're on like a Manhattan sidewalk, right? People are just in Midtown. People are just like not even looking at you. People are walking by. People are like, sometimes they'll take it, uh, the flyers or say something, and sometimes people really are interested because when we were protesting up in the Bronx at Assemblymember Hasty's office, and
I remember that.
I liked that protest a lot because when we protest outside the governor's office, like it's just in Midtown, right? Like people are just walking by, going to work. They don't live in that area, right? They live in maybe like Westchester or something. When you're outside of like a specific representative's like district office, you're interacting with the people that are his constituents, right? We met people that were like disabled people that were like walking by and I was like, hey, or rolling by, like, hey, what are you guys doing? We met like nursing home like workers and home care workers and people who were like actually affected by it. So some people just kept walking, but some people you could tell like they would like look over and read the signs and talk to us. And I think um it's always interesting taking up so much space in a protest because you have the people that are so supportive and then you have the people that are like screaming back at you like, move out the way. um, you're bound to piss off somebody in this line of work.
I definitely agree, but that's the thing with advocacy. We're trying to promote uh, things to hopefully get much better. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess my final question to you is, what advice could you give someone that has a disability that may be struggling with dealing with certain things going on in their lives, such as acceptance,
Yeah.
or what types of advice could you give someone that might be struggling with a disability now that might help them out if they're watching this video right now and listening to your story and being able to benefit from, something that you might have to say?
Yeah, I love getting asked this question because I think this is like the crux of what we do as a community. I mean, a few thoughts I have, and I think one is, in disability justice, you know, circles, there's this acknowledgement of like, rather than independence, interdependence, right? So not this like hyper focus of I have to do things on my own and be independent, but rather interdependence is acknowledging how linked we are to other people and how much we need each other to survive. And my first advice, I think, is to really embrace that. And that means a few different things, right? That means one, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to not be able to do everything on your own, whether that's like an emotional piece or like a physical piece. And it also acknowledges that like being a part of the disability community is one of the main points, I think, of healing, of like forming a disabled identity and making a relationship with your body or your disability or whatever it is, right, that's going on, because it's hard to be the only disabled person in every space that you enter. And I was very lucky as a kid because I went to a summer camp for disabled children. I think a lot about Crip Camp, the movie, because I kind of resonate a lot with that. A lot of my friends from summer camp are like now in Adapt, so we're kind of like, it's interesting to see the parallels of like the next generation of that film. But I say that to say that I went to public school, but so I was very used to being the only disabled person everywhere I went. But then I also had the summer camp that was this like 3 week escape every year where it was only kids like me. And it was the calmest I think I ever felt as a child, and the most, you know, um, besides my own house, the most at home I ever really felt. So I think my best advice is to meet other disabled people and to get involved in disability circles, and also, to acknowledge that disability and our relationship with our own disability is very different across people. I think that the public expects us to be like a monolith, right? Every disabled person is the same. And I think even sometimes our own disabled people like expect us to all want the same things or have the same view of the world, right?
That's true.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So acknowledging like that we're allowed to have different reactions and we're allowed to be upset with our disability too, because I think it's hard to publicly acknowledge that disability is difficult because we already know that that's what the public is thinking, and we get treated so terribly because of that, right? So sometimes I think we feel pressured like, no, everything's fine, disability pride, oh my goodness, which yes, of course that's there too, that's a massive part of it, but it's hard to acknowledge the harder parts of it because we're so on defense from the world telling us that we should, be suicidal, right? Kind of looping back into our earlier conversation. So I think acknowledging the nuances of disability and bringing your own relationship to it it takes work, and it's a cyclical process, and it's not something that happens overnight at all. But making meaning in your life, not away from your disability, but with your disability. What ways, I guess I think for myself, it's such a big part of my life. I built kind of my career around my disability, right? I want to be a psychologist that works with other disabled people. I do all this adapt work, right, for disability rights. So there's a way um, to build it healthily into your life if that's what you want.
Well, Nina, it was definitely a pleasure to interview you, and I hope that the rest of the channel will enjoy this, the rest of the viewers. And until next time, folks, take care and peace.